Yeah.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll just, okay, do you have any announcements, correspondence? We're doing this like a real meeting. No announcements, correspondence? Okay, you have one guest. This is all pretty much just,
Who's our guest?
well, Mark and Debbie, we're going to talk about this is special. So, well, I guess we could, we don't have a purchase orders, warrants, or any of that stuff, but I guess we could take public comments. Anyone has a quick comment? Okay. If you don't have any comments, Mark, I'm going to just turn it over to you.
Do we have to accept the agenda first, since he's the agenda item?
Yeah, we should.
Okay.
So I'll make a motion to accept the agenda.
You got it.
Okay, well, second it.
All those in favor, Mike,
Yes.
Sue,
Yes.
Nick?
Yes.
We don't have a name to this.
Well, he's part for the discussion, so he's just here.
I just go to seminar.
Okay. You don't have to stand up. You're getting older.
I offered him a chair and he said he likes to stand.
Yeah, I'm sitting on my keister all day, so I'm perfectly fine standing.
Thanks for coming.
No, my pleasure. So I know we, obviously, this has come up a couple times over the years. I think I had first discussed it in discussion with some of the trustees back in 2018. And obviously I'm here today just to provide a little more information on limited home rule generally in Ohio and how that may impact the township. I'll start out and I'll generally discuss what the process is if you want to become a limited home rule township, if it's even possible. And then kind of the second part of what I'll discuss are the considerations. And by considerations, I mean pros and potential drawbacks, if any, to becoming a limited home rule township. So before I get into that, do the trustees have any specific questions, specific things that they are curious about as far as limited home rule, or do you want me to just kind of go through it?
I think for me, I want to hear like the overview and then we'll have questions at the end,
Okay.
but
Okay.
basically, yeah.
So as far as process goes, there's essentially three ways to become a limited home rule township. The first process is by petition. And in some ways, it's driven by population. For a petition to be submitted by the electorate, I believe it has to be 10% of those in the township have to sign the petition. But that petition method can't be utilized unless there's at least 2,500 residents in the township. Obviously, you guys meet that method. If the petition signed, the trustees then pass a resolution, then essentially it goes on the ballot through the Board of Elections. And if it's approved by the electorate, then you become a limited home rule township. So that's one method to do it. Again, the key there is there has to be at least 2,500 residents. There's a rule that if you do get the petition prior to sending it to the Board of Elections to be voted on, you have to appoint a township administrator. You guys obviously have already done that, so that wouldn't be a drawback for you. There has to be, I think, 3.5 million in assets available to go that route. So the township has to be, there's a solvency requirement. But then after the voters vote on it, you're good to go. So that's one method. Second method, again, is population based. If there's at least 5,000 residents in the township, the trustees can pass a resolution looking to approve limited home rule township structure. That eventually follows a similar process, gets certified by the Board of Elections for the ballot, the voters vote on it. So one, you have voter initiated The second method is board initiated. And you can utilize either of those as long as you meet those resident thresholds. So the second method that I just mentioned, board resolution, and then have the voters vote on it, would be the typical method that Brimfield would utilize here, given your population level.
And that's over 5,000
That's
residents?
over 5,000.
Is that a unanimous vote? Or?
Majority. Yeah. Majority of the board would have to approve, and then majority of the electorate.
When you say population 5,000, where's the population determined from? Is that from the census study? Is that the data we use to drive that decision?
Yeah, everything's census driven.
And then, not to get you too far off track, but you said we need to have a township administrator in those pieces. Is it a legal definition of township administrator, or is it something that we just internally say, hey, you're gonna be
Revised code, calls for the township administrator in those instances.
John, that's not the position we put Holly in right now, so we would have to change that as part of the process. She's just a business
Category of the
manager.
township
Oh,
executive.
okay. Yeah, so you'd have to have a title change there if you
Okay.
had, a petition.
Okay,
So you have Holly functioning in that capacity essentially, for all intents and purposes, from what I'm aware of, but. So that wouldn't be a major obstacle for you. And again, just because you have, more than 5,000 residents, that's not to say voters could still circulate a petition and utilize that first method. So it's not mutually exclusive. Either method could be followed. And then you have the third method, is the final method. Essentially, the board could pass a resolution for statute. Normal townships are generally referred to as statutory townships. That's what Brimfield is right now. Just a traditional township structure. So this third method is only available to townships, statutory townships that have 15,000 or more residents. I believe you're under that threshold, so this third method wouldn't currently be available for you. But essentially, if the township has 15,000 residents, the board can pass a resolution to become a limited home rule township. There's a 30-day wait period. And if no referendum petitions filed on that resolution within the 30 days, then it becomes effective. So there's basically no vote required if you have more than 15,000 residents. So those are the three methods for becoming a limited home rule township and making the transition from the statutory township. Any other questions on that?
Again, that's census data.
Yeah, it's census driven.
Because we're under that on the census, but we're over that without the census. So I didn't know.
So, yeah, it's kind of interesting how it works in Ohio. So you have political subdivisions, which are townships, villages, and cities, and counties, and districts, and stuff like that, the political subdivisions of the state of Ohio. Then you have municipalities, which are villages and cities. The township's not a municipality. The revised code gives home rule power typically only to villages and cities. Townships generally don't get to have these limited home rule, or these home rule powers. The revised code gives it in a limited form here, and it's all statutory based. So we basically just have to stick to the revised code to achieve that. When we're talking about, the traditional step is to go from a township to a village, then to a city. Townships are capped at 5,000 residents. So technically you can't be a township if you have 5,000 residents. There's some attorney general opinions out there, I think largely from the 50s, I think there might be one or two from the 60s, where the attorney general says if you apply to become you have to apply to become a village before you can become a city. And even if you apply and you have 12,000 residents, because you weren't a municipality, the revised code only allows municipality villages to become a city. And if you apply as a township, even if you have 12,000 residents, you're gonna be a village. And you're stuck with that until the next census. So to your point, if you, let's say you apply to become a village now, and you have 12 or 13,000, is that about what your current?
On the census, yeah.
On the census, I believe you would operate as a village until the next 2030 census, so it'd be an odd situation if you ever wanted to go that route. I think since then, they've modified the code a little bit to allow for direct incorporation to a city, but there's kind of a weird gray area there for villages, just to your point about population level.
So tell me the difference between limited home rule and a village. What would be the difference?
So, counties and townships are pure statutory creatures. So as a township, and I'm gonna speak broadly here because there's exceptions that I want to make that clear. So I'm giving you general information today. There's always exceptions. There's always specific issues that come up that would require research for those specific issues. But traditionally, townships have the powers, just like counties, that are enumerated in the revised code. If the power is not in the revised code for a township to execute, you don't have the power. Again, general statement, there's exceptions to every rule. Cities and villages have home rule power under, I believe it's Section 3 of Article 18 of the Constitution, I think it is the home rule portion of the state constitution. That gives municipalities home rule powers. What that means is they can exercise powers of local self-government regarding police, sanitary, matters of local concern essentially that don't conflict with state law. So there's a reserve ability to regulate things that aren't specifically in the revised code. And so you're not really capped as a city or village. You can come up with other ideas as long as they don't conflict with the revised code. Taking that a step farther, a city and a village can also have a charter, which is basically like a mini constitution for the city or village. And that allows, in certain circumstances, the city or village to pass law that actually conflicts with provisions of the revised code. That's traditionally for things that are purely local in concern, things that aren't of a general statewide nature. So, I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Well, I guess we always say this limited home rule, which would still be a township, right?
You would.
So just the fact that the village doesn't mean anything different. You would still have the home rule as a village, right? Or those.
So it's limited home rule in a township. So cities and villages, full home rule.
Okay.
So, like I just said, if you're a city or a village, you can pass a charter, and then you can actually pass resolutions that conflict with the revised code.
So it's the limited
A
part that gets
limited
taken
home
away.
township,
Village.
you still can't conflict with the revised code, generally speaking. But you can regulate things that the revised code doesn't explicitly give you the power to regulate, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So you still have the baseline of the revised code, and again, generally speaking, you can't conflict with it. You could do things in addition that are consistent with it, though. So additional and consistent with the revised code, where cities, villages with charters, they can actually conflict with state law, depending on what the issue is, and there's a whole home rule analysis that you have to do. There's multiple factors you gotta take into consideration.
Is there, and maybe I've just heard this for years, if we want to become a village or a city, do we have to get the approval of our touching contiguous cities that touch around us?
Yeah, going off the top of my head, there's a rule that you can't, if you're a township and you want to incorporate, you can't fully encompass an existing municipality, so you can't surround it and make it an island. You can, as a township, become a city, even though you border a city. I think what the rule is, you have to provide notice to that legislative authority, and then the legislative authority can decide, okay, we're gonna approve of this. So there's a little bit of a veto ability.
So could one of them say I veto and then it's all over? Because we have Jed's with two of them.
Yeah, I mean, I can look into it a little bit further, but that's my recollection.
Is that the same way with the village?
I think, yeah, that's for municipalities, again, if I recall correctly.
Because then we can payroll tax as a village, correct?
Yeah, you have taxation.
So they're not gonna-
Yeah, the municipality. Yeah, I will, I'll double check that for you. Any other questions on this?
No, that's good, thanks, Mike.
Sure. Any other questions for you guys? So that's the process typically, and I kind of just outlined the main benefit of becoming a limited home rule township, and that's you do have those limited home rule powers. It does even allow you, so typically right now, you guys are subject to the county's regulations. There's a little bit of flexibility there. If you became a limited home rule township, you can have some provisions that are different than the county's regulations. There's some caps on that, but it gives you a little bit more flexibility there. And again, it just gives you more power to regulate, essentially. Because right now the revised code gives you 27 powers, and that's it. If you can't fit what you do within one of those code provisions, generally speaking, you don't have the authority to do it. With that limited home rule transition, okay, well, here's 27 things, but now we can regulate matters of local concern, even though they're not explicitly spelled out in those 27 sections, as long as the extras that you do are consistent. So it gives you more flexibility. If an issue comes up and you want to address it, it gives you more power to do that.
So noise resolution would be one of them, right?
You could do something like that, yeah. Now so that's one of the benefits. You can then have some additional enforcement powers. And I guess I'll talk about some of the potential drawbacks. The big ones are you have to have a police department. Now, for a township that doesn't have it, that would obviously be a significant expense that they're not currently incurring. You guys already have that. I mentioned having a township administrator. You have to make some technical changes, but you kind of already have that covered as well. You already have a fire department, even though I don't think that's a requirement for becoming a limited home rule township. You already have a lot of the services really that are covered. You have additional flexibility in hiring engineers for specific types of projects. Now, the county engineer, so that's, in my mind, that's a positive. You have the ability to go out and hire professional services, engineering and legal specifically. Obviously, you do that to a certain extent already, but specifically for the engineers, they can act like project managers. They can put bid specs together, things like that for specific projects. County engineer still supervises it. And I'm working off the technical code language. In practice, it tends to be a little bit more flexible. And there's typically a little bit more autonomy given by the county engineers. But it's one of the statutory benefits, the ability for you to go out and hire additional professional services. Obviously, that comes with the cost, so you can do that as a positive or a negative or a wash, I suppose. Same thing with legal services. You have the ability, you have to select a law director. So obviously there could be an additional cost with that. The revised code also allows you just to contract with the county prosecutor's office to function as the law director. So if you didn't want to modify anything there, you can work with the county prosecutor's office and kind of continue that traditional relationship that you have. So that's a way to look at managing expenses. For a limited home rule township perspective.
Mark, what are some of the things besides, I believe we can write our own tickets at that point? What are other revenue streams that we can get? Because all those are additional expenses that you just talked about.
Yeah, I guess let me step back because we were talking about enforcement. So the law director position has a little bit more enforcement authority on a local level. You don't have to go to the county municipal court. You can kind of handle things in-house a little bit more. You don't have to go through the county prosecutor's office unless you're using them as your law director to file lawsuits and things like that. Typically what we do now, even if you guys utilize me, for instance, I'll still call over to Brett or Chris McDurry or somebody at the county prosecutor's office and give them a heads up to see if they have any objections, typically what we'll do. So you would have to have that conversation. Same is true with the engineer. As far as enforcement authority goes, the township would also have the ability to utilize the police department to issue citations to enforce your guys' resolutions. Now, you can have a civil fine up to $1,000. You're fairly restricted as far as creating criminal penalties. It's traditionally up to $1,000 fine, and it's up to you guys to set that amount in the resolution. And again, you can then utilize the police department in conjunction with your law director as a limited home rule township for enforcement purposes.
Mark, I'm sorry, what would be an example of that? So it's not a criminal citation, it's basically a civil citation.
Right.
And there's a fine associated with that. So what types of,
Could be like housing violation type issues, things of that nature, as one example. But
so
it could be essentially anything that the township has properly regulated and there's a compliance element to it, you can attach a civil penalty then.
so what would be the civil summons or civil citation of some form is issued, and what's their remedy to come in and address that? So it doesn't go through the county municipal court? It stays. It could.
It could go county or it could be local. Yeah, I think you can set up like a type of housing court type thing in that situation, for instance. Or you can authorize separate litigation to pursue that remedy.
Would it have to be a police officer that's issuing that housing violation, or could that come from some other?
It would be up to the township to structure that. And that's just one example.
So going to the police piece, does it change anything with traffic citations, any of those normal citations they give? All that money still going to the court system
Right.
that we deal with?
Yeah, and one of the, what I view as a benefit, although there's some requirements of additional personnel like I just discussed, all the contracts that the township has entered into previously, the way that the board functions, the qualifications for the trustees, none of that changes. That's all just carried over. So, really it's an overlay of additional powers with a few exceptions on top of the current township governance.
Were we able to start our own little court system to keep the fines?
I think that's what the code's contemplating.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, the statutory languages allows the township to handle it
So that means all
internally,
our
essentially.
fines would stay in the township.
If you handle it in-house, versus going and having the traditional fines downtown.
How would
Because
that,
if we did, go ahead.
I was gonna say, how does that work then, right? Would the law director serve as the judge, or how would you
No.
internally run that court
No,
system?
typically.
Because like a mayor's court, typically the mayor runs that piece,
Or a
correct?
magistrate,
Yeah.
contract out for a magistrate, and then the law director kind of functions as the prosecutor essentially.
But here you'd have 3 board members. How do you handle that at the court system
You
level?
probably have a magistrate.
So that'd be another cost we'd have to pick up.
Because of thinking of all the additional costs that we have to do and the ability to collect any revenues, and it just becomes, I don't know, what's the big positive out of all this for, let's say we had to spend another $300 and some thousand in personnel, but we don't collect tickets, we don't, what is the big positive for that expenditure?
The big, is the power to regulate, is the big positive. Yeah, it's, from a taxation purpose, or perspective, you don't really have a lot of additional taxation powers. That is one thing where, I said you can't conflict with the revised code. The revised code says townships only have these certain specific powers to tax, and that's a hard restriction. So you can't look at the code and say, well, you have 3 types of taxation powers or subject matter to the tax, and we're gonna create a new one. You can't do that because the revised code says townships only have these and that's it. So that's one of the ways where you kind of run up into a limit because you're a limited home rule entity.
We hear about cities with impact fees. Is that something that you could do as limited home rule then?
Impact fees, I can't give you an answer to that because impact fees, it ends up being a really detailed analysis, and it depends what the fee's for. I think even municipalities have struggled to implement impact fees in a lot of areas. So I guess I would lean towards saying no to that question.
So that if we went the next step would be to become a village. What revenue sources would we be able to get as being a village versus a limited?
So, yeah, if you wanted to become a municipality, you could have traditional taxation powers as a city or village. So you're not limited by that cap on townships can only do A, B, and C. You have more flexibility for both income tax and sales tax purposes.
But it's still pretty much the same personnel that we would have to bring in, right?
It's a city or village?
Oh, we'd have to have a mayor.
Right, yeah. Well, there's 3 different types of government.
We wouldn't
You
have a board,
the
actually.
traditional system, where you have a council and a mayor. There's city managers and all other kinds of things that you can structure it like.
Okay.
But I mean, with the impact of the jets, I mean, I don't see cities wanting to give us any kind of permission to cut their funding off.
Yeah, so I mean, by default, that contract remains in place and you have to negotiate. I haven't looked at your guys' jet contracts, so I can't say exactly what you have to
We
do.
probably still got another 80 years on it and then a 100-year renewal.
I mean, it's a contract, like anything, there's provisions for termination and all that stuff. So that's something that you guys are interested in looking in. I can certainly take a look and outline the process for terminating the jet if you ever got there.
My concern with the village is, I know that we can collect more money, but a lot of residents move to the township because of the tax benefit. They're able to not be in that tax piece, which then all of a sudden now they're strapped with those additional taxes, the payroll tax.
That's the only thing that I would think that could make us enough money to pay for all the additional personnel that we would need. I mean, we don't do that with the limited home rule. We're just funded.
Right. Yeah, I'm just kind of looking at it from that taxpayer, right? Like, a lot of people get a tax benefit for being in the township. That's one of the benefits.
Yep.
Yeah, but not anymore, with all these levies we keep running and the schools keep running.
But we'd still have the school levies to deal with. That's really the bulk of the taxation of the schools right now.
Now if you read Facebook, they think it's all us.
Well, and again, you can look at managing costs as far as personnel goes, and you already have the big pieces in place. You don't have to utilize independent engineers. You can just keep using the county engineer. Same thing with the county prosecutor's office. You can keep using them as law director. You gotta have a contract then.
Can you phase in? So let's say we initially make that move to home rule and we contract everything still under the county. And then, 3 years later, we phase in a law director. 3 years later, you phase in engineering, like as you kind of stabilize.
So the engineer is purely optional. You have to have a law director.
Right.
So you would have to name the county engineer as law director and have a contract for that.
Okay.
If you don't do private. So you
Can
gotta
you-
do, somebody's got.
Right, but can you end that contract and then go private, or are you locked in?
No, you're not locked in.
Okay.
Yeah,
That's what I'm
at
saying,
that
so
point-
you can phase
At
in.
that point, it'll be contractual.
I mean, a law director could just be, it could be you, or it could be Chad, right?
It could be any attorney licensed in Ohio. Yeah. What's that?
Be part-time too.
Yep, it can be full-time or part-time.
Mark,
Yeah, but you have to have a person in place to serve that capacity.
I had a question also, Mark, just to maybe put this into the 1,000-yard overview perspective. So I don't know how many townships we have in Ohio. It's probably a very large number.
80.
It's counties. Yeah.
Okay, so give or take, how many townships in Ohio, of all the townships in Ohio, are limited home rule? Do we have that data?
33.
I think locally there's about
33.
Are they the bigger ones?
33.
yeah, locally, I'm
Statewide.
saying, though.
Oh,
So 8 locally, roughly statewide, okay.
Well, who's the closest one locally to us?
Or
Thanks.
Is Jackson?
Springfield, Mike, is it Springfield?
Jackson or Boardman would be my guess.
Boardman, Ohio.
But doesn't Boardman have like 40,000 residents there? I mean, they have a huge number.
Yeah, same thing with Jackson, because Jackson covers that Canton area.
A lot of.
Another question I have also is, if you become a limited home rule township, are you required to have a civil service commission?
Required, I don't believe so, no.
We're just over 40,000 in the last sentence.
So Mark, what do you think the big positives are of this?
So the big one, like I said, is the additional ability to regulate. So hand in hand with that, courts are going to be more likely to uphold a resolution that you enact because you have more authority given by the limited home rule power. Like I said, your guys' role, your guys' requirements to hold office aren't modified. You have the additional legal options to enforce resolutions and remedy violations. You can, like I said, you can handle it locally and at least a little bit more fluidly or efficiently instead of having to put the burden on the county. And then, I mean, essentially how the county works, you get one individual assigned, and I'm speaking generally. A county will typically assign one assistant prosecuting attorney to represent the townships in the county. That's just how it works in Ohio.
So it could speed up our zoning?
It could potentially speed it up.
Because it just seems
It's
like.
really different in every county, obviously, and it depends on workload and all
With
that
us
stuff.
having our own law director, I mean, that could, you know, because we pass these resolutions to get things cleaned up and then they just never happen. And I just constantly hear that, oh, they're waiting on the prosecutor, they're waiting on that.
It seems like, because he gets the violations and then we sit for 3 months, 6 months, and then they make one improvement and we restart that cycle because we can't react fast enough, and they just make the single improvement and go back and go away, and we're back in
Could
that
that
process.
help?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the benefits of having, you kind of have additional firepower with a limited home rule township, is kind of the simplistic way to say it. So in addition to that, I mentioned you can have the civil fines up to 1,000. You can adopt, you don't have to just work off state law, you can adopt model codes. You can't create your own code, but if there's another, you think Indiana is doing their electrical code better, you can adopt that code, or plumbing code, whatever you want to do. So you have a little bit more power there. You can require certain permits through resolutions. You have the option of providing water and sewer services if you so desired, if you thought that was an important thing to have come in through the township. Soil erosion, water management, you can enact regulations for that. Be aware you still can't modify subdivision regulations, road construction standards, and certain stormwater issues. Those would continue to be regulated by the county and state law. I mentioned current contracts aren't really impacted. I think the jets would be an exception. We'd have to look at that if you wanted to go that route, or the electorate petition, we'd have to take a look at those jet contracts and see, what the process is to move forward with that.
What about county roads? Is that something that we have to take on as our burden? Do the county roads still stay county roads?
That stays unmodified.
Okay. So we don't pick up any additional mileage of roadway that we would have to cut?
So those are the highlights. I know it would be less of an impact fiscally if you had additional taxation powers like a city and village, but those just don't come with a limited home rule structure. But like I said, there's ways to manage the cost of additional personnel if you guys desire to do that, primarily by continuing to work with the county. And you could, and to your point, Mr. Quay, you could have a little bit of a hybrid approach to it as well. You could utilize the county engineer's office for every project, but one, you think it's special enough, deserves enough attention for the residents, you're gonna hire a private engineer to take the ball and run with it. Or maybe it's a timeliness issue.
Now, currently, the local government funds dispersed by the county are separated by municipalities kind of get this weird votes, townships get a vote, largest municipality gets a vote. We become limited home rule, are we still considered the township as part of that?
Unmodified, you're still a township. Yeah.
Okay, so we wouldn't have any additional leverage in that conversation at that point.
I don't think it would change it.
Okay.
Yeah, I can look at that specifically if you'd like, though.
Yeah, because I think that's a big piece here is we don't see a fair disbursement of that money. If our population is at a set number, if we can have a bigger voice at that table, that becomes another potential financial piece for us.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'll check that out.
And I don't think the villages get much more either, so.
But there's a different disbursement for the villages than there is for the cities than there is for the townships. Remember how they broke that out? The villages were getting
A
more
lot
than
of
us
villages were getting less than us.
because of how we split it between us, but we never really got our fair share of that
No, we
disbursement.
never will because Ken always gets the bulk.
Right. And that's why I was just trying to see if there's a way that we could partner up with cities if we have that city vote.
I mean, should we be looking into a village?
Well, like I said, I think there's a provision in the revised code for you to do a direct incorporation. It's been a while since I've looked at those attorney general opinions, and if memory serves, I think they're pretty old too. They're from the 50s and 60s.
Is someone to look into it, or have you look into it?
If you want. Yeah.
I mean, this is gonna be a big decision, either way, we need to look at all options, I guess.
I think we need to lay all the facts out there, and then I guess the question I would say is, we see the benefits here to the township itself. What do you see as benefits and drawbacks to the citizens of our community, right? Like, this is a big impact on them. What have you seen in those other limited home rules, or just from your legal perspective? What are the benefits and drawbacks to them, just specifically to the limited home rules we can venture down?
Yeah, so I mean, let's say a resident comes to you, they have an issue and they say, hey, can you do something about this? You know, right now you may have to say, we don't, you know, we're not a municipality, we don't have the power to regulate this. It gives you that flexibility and say, you know what, this is an issue for 2,000 residents in this portion of the township. We're gonna create some stormwater or water maintenance rules for this area to improve their lives, you know. It gives you that ability where right now you don't have it.
What's a drawback to the residents?
So, you know, you can look at it like a drawback or not, but the biggest impact to the township would be personnel. Like I mentioned, potential engineers, you have to have a water record, but again, like I said, you can manage that, you can use the county or a combination if you wanted, which you're kind of doing already. Township administrator and police department, you know, those are the main big ticket items, but you already have some of those personnel in place and you manage the rest of it.
So, there's those 27, however many number of items that the
I just
township.
made that one.
Yeah, whatever that number is, that's what I'm saying, whatever the number is, there's these items that we can do. If we become limited home rule, we can't modify that. So if the ORC says the township can't do this, we can't modify that, is that correct?
Just like, yeah, that tax example I used, it says you only have these specific taxation powers and that's it.
Okay,
So that's an example of a restriction, but if the revised code doesn't cap it and just says, well, this is the current rule for, well, I want to say, earring manufacturer, and you want to come up with a different local code because you think there's some kind of safety implication to that, you can do that because the revised code doesn't say you can. So you can gap fill and create consistent regulations with the revised code.
okay. One of the questions that's come up from some residents is about regulating shooting on private property. As limited home rule, are we able to do that here or not?
So, no, so agriculture, hunting, trapping, fishing, firearms and natural resources are traditionally off limits. Now, there may be exceptions to that, so depending what you want to do, you know, we research it. If you have something specific you want to know.
But shooting after 9 o'clock, I mean, we can regulate that.
Because you can do that under the noise ordinance, correct?
Well, that's, yeah, you're not regulating use though. in that instance.
You're regulating noise, but if you got it, let's say you live in a small housing development, somebody's shooting out back, can we then regulate that you can't have firearms in certain areas, or that's just off
Yeah,
limits?
Yeah, I think, and I'll look at that specifically, because frankly, I did like a 9-page opinion for you guys. It's just draft right now, because I wanted to see what kind of questions you had today. So I'll be following this up with the legal opinion, so I'll include these couple additional items in there. I'll do some research and I'll include it.
Yeah, and I knew it was a specific question, but that's, if you could research it, that would be great.
Sure.
You mentioned stormwater. Right now, it's county soil and water deals with a lot of the water runoff, water problems we're seeing in our community. Would this give us ability to enforce more rules and regulations, or does it still end up having to go back to county water?
Stormwater, I think we have to continue following the county's regulations. And at least the municipalities I work with, the local stormwater regulations largely reflect the county's regulations anyways. A model stormwater code came out 2017, I think, and that's when most municipalities updated their code, and they did that in conjunction with counties as well, so there's probably not gonna be a huge difference.
So I just know that's a pain point that we see. It probably comes up multiple times a year here. And then if it goes to the county, it just sits because their enforcement ability is less. So, if I'm looking for benefits to our citizens, is that something that we'd be able
It
to?
seems like most of our problems are on private citizen problem, backyards and stuff, we don't. I mean, even with home limited rule, we don't control the backyards. I think it's a civil matter for the majority of it.
Yeah.
I'll be sure to include a section of that,
I just had a kind of follow-on comment, listening to Mark kind of summarize everything. So I'm not speaking for the board, and speaking more for myself as a resident. So the county prosecutor as our law director, I don't know that sometimes we get pushed to the back of the line. In fact, I think often we do. I don't know, in my opinion, using them as our law director, I don't know would be the best solution. So I think taking on the cost of having our own law director would make sense. I think we would get better services from that.
We probably paid for that already.
Yeah, we may do. I'm just saying if you're trying, as Mark alluded to, if you're trying to save costs, he goes, well, here's an option, you could use them. In my opinion, I don't know that that's the best solution for us as a community.
We do see it firsthand, so.
Well, yeah, from our side, yeah, from that side, but this side would be a little bit different as well. But, so that's the first comment I have. The second comment is, if we have all of these townships in Ohio, and we have such a small number that have become limited home rule, I guess I'd be curious to look at, as you look at this and examine this and to consider making decisions going forward, I would want to look at those communities that have made the transition to limited rule. I would probably want to spend some time sitting down and meeting with them and kind of saying, hey, number one, how many of these limited home rule townships are similar to us as far as overall staffing for our township employees and population? Are these townships generally larger? They generally have more resources and staffing to absorb these kind of things versus are we kind of like, hey, are we a little too small for this? I think that's a fair question to ask. That's something I would want to do, is spend time meeting with the townships that have done that and kind of do some comparables on that end before you would make that kind of decision as well. So just a few thoughts and
That was
reflections.
the township assembly, one of the years I was there, I sat in on a limited home rule, and the majority of them are the wealthy townships with the high populations and the increased revenue streams. And I did have a chance to talk to, I can't remember what I talked to, but the bigger townships go towards it. The smaller ones, a lot of them are still mowing their own grass, trustees, and so.
I wonder, Holly, if that's something we could work on, maybe trying to look at a couple limited home rules that are near us and set up a visit with us going down there, them coming up here, so we can have that conversation and to allow the chiefs the police chief, fire chief, and our road superintendent to have those conversations with their crews to kind of get that plus and minus the perspective from them as we explore this.
And so I view this as kind of a introductory preliminary discussion, and if it was something you guys were interested in, I have some of that information, but I actively didn't incorporate it into this because I wasn't sure how far down the rabbit hole you guys wanted to go. But Holly, I can get you some of the information I have as a starting point, and then, if you guys ever want me to do a chart or anything like that to make it a little bit easier to look at, that's fine too.
Well, this is good, because we are gonna have more questions. This is nothing that we're gonna pass tomorrow, so.
Sure. And Chief, to your point, I think you're right, the township's already, as far as the legal aspect goes, the township is already incurring a lot of its own costs for that beyond the county prosecutor's office. The big difference would be actually going and prosecuting citations, because you're not doing that right now. You're only using the county prosecutor's office. So that would probably be the largest change out of the whole thing.
The biggest thing would be you, John. fiscally trying to figure it out.
Well, we pay for all the legal staff. By the time we pay for PDs and Chad and you, and we spend enough to pay for a law director, or to pay for Holly's position. We're spending a lot of the cash already, but, and I look at us as a small township, but we're gonna keep growing. I mean, we're gonna be a large township, depending on what you look like in Portage County, we're huge in Portage County, but Jackson and Boardman are huge compared to us, but where do we fall? And where do they start? Where do those townships start doing that? Where do they start really looking at that? Is it 15,000? Do they, I mean, is there just a?
It could be as little as 2,500. I mean, the big decision is, do you want to invest on some level in additional power and regulate? You know, that's really what it comes down to.
Mark, I think you mentioned at the beginning that towns, I think it was the Ohio Revised Code, the townships are capped generally around 5,000 residents. So with,
I'm sorry, you said township.
I believe so, I couldn't,
Villages.
it was villages, okay, they're capped at 5,000 residents.
Townships are not.
Okay.
Yeah, the township form of government kind of came in with the Pilgrims, honestly, and that, I think initially there were only a few large kind of structured townships in Ohio. And then I think in 1912 is when the concept of home rule in cities and villages started to get incorporated in the Constitution. But yeah, right now the village cap is 5,000. And then once the next census comes around, when you're a village, and if you exceed the 5,000 number, excluding, I think the revised code excludes colleges and like penal institutions, that's when we transition to a city.
So we can be from a village even with our population size?
Yeah, like I said, those attorney general opinions, and I can go back and do some research on it, but the attorney general opinions I remember looking at last time we looked at the issue, it was kind of odd because they said only a municipality can incorporate into a city, and because even if a township has a population in excess of 5,000, you're not yet a municipality, so you're incorporating as a township, so the first step is village, then city, so it's a really weird kind of opinion, in my opinion, but I'll go back and pull that and send it over to you.
My first police job was in Franklin Township out in Portage Lake, which is now the city of New Franklin. And at that time, they went through a similar process. So after I had left there, they carved out a portion of the township and became the village of New Franklin for X amount of time. So that was their first step. You still had the township around it. They created a village. And then I think after a couple of years or so, then they transitioned from the village piece to become the city of New Franklin.
Well, and how is Canal Fulton too, because it's in the middle of Lawrence Township, isn't it?
It is.
Is that the same?
Well, I think, yeah, different. I think Canal Fulton's, yeah,
So it was Lawrence Township there first, and then they
I don't know.
created.
Yeah, I was looking specifically where the township, where Franklin Township went through the transition process to become the city of New Franklin.
Sometimes you still keep the city in the center of the township around the outside. You look at Ravenna, right?
Ravenna.
Ravenna's the city, and the township really kind of almost encircles.
Well, but was Ravenna Township there before Ravenna City was? And then they started that kind of like the same way that New Franklin did. Shit, at one point you tried to incorporate, right?
Yeah, we
We
did
talked
that.
about it, but we never got any further than what we're doing here.
Didn't Steve Moore try to do something?
Pardon me?
Didn't Steve Moore try to do something down by the end?
Back then, the thing that really killed us was we had to take county roads. They changed that. So that was the one of the things.
That was headed up by Leo Weil. Leo Weil, do you remember Leo, the attorney, Leo Weil?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Akron came in and took Mogador Reservoir.
And even after that,
It was nasty, it was really nasty.
dead set. So it was just trying to drop the lakes to anything. But that was when Steve Moore was here, you're correct.
Does the same rule apply, having to ask all the townships or the cities around us if we do it in the middle of our township like they did in a small area? I mean, we're not touching any of those cities by doing it in turn.
I'm sorry, to do what?
Well, New Franklin started a little small section within their township. but it was in the township limits, right? So it wasn't touching the other cities that were around. Is that a way that?
I think the rule is you have to be contiguous, so you can't have different islands, but as long as you can have a village within a township.
So John's looking for that workaround, right? Like, we don't turn the whole township into a village. Now you don't need the permission from Kent. It takes away the veto power from Kent and Talmadge. If you just say, we're just gonna take the center part of Brimfield, make it a village, keep the outer part of the township, and then eventually incorporate it all down the road.
I'll take one.
So you'd almost split the township at that point, though. Then you'd have two different operating boards. You'd have a board of trustees, and then you'd have the village council. And you'd have two separate pieces depending on where you reside.
Osnaburg Township is like that.
I'm sorry.
Osnaburg, as you go down into East Canton, East Canton is the city, and then the township is Osnaburg, goes on the outside.
I think the problem with that, though, John, then is gonna be the funding, because now you're gonna have to fund two separate governments.
Yeah.
And then you got the jet agreements, how do you carve those up?
Well,
They stay with the
You
township.
can't pay the city or the village jet dollars, because that's the township's money.
Right, but then you have to modify the jet agreements, because you're taking property. I think it would,
Yeah, you
You're
could
right, guys.
incorporate them into the jet agreements, but then, yeah.
Then you have to split the
you have
money.
a Funding issue,
yeah,
unless they agree to take zero. But
right. I think funding would be a major hurdle in that case, because now you need to double everything.
But that's just a way to get around having to get permission from everybody. I guess if we were looking to get away from that.
Just you can ask.
Well, if I'm Talmadge, I'm not saying yes. I mean, they make a boatload of money off of us right now. I mean, I wouldn't.
I mean, if you guys got down that far down the line, I have some ideas how you could work around that. Yeah, just leave it at that.
Okay. Okay. So you're gonna provide that stuff to Holly, what Chief just brought up, of looking at a smaller section of the township?
So I'll include that as one of the aspects of the, opinion to you guys.
Okay.
Or maybe I'll do that separately, because it's kind of a different topic technically, but, okay, I'll get that out to you guys as well.
So next action steps, as a board, do we want to have Holly look at some other communities that we can start talking with, so we can gather more questions and then do another public meeting like this, once we kind of digest your legal interpretation and digest some of those comments and had some time to talk, and then come back to this forum again?
I don't want to set up a meeting until we get enough of the information back. So Holly, when you think we have enough for another meeting,
We'll do.
you wouldn't mind letting us know?
But just kind of action planning, so the community knows what direction we're headed.
And we definitely need to look at the other. We already have it done out there by somebody else. We just need to look at theirs and see how it's going. And ask questions of them and what are the problems they run into, and the good things about it, so.
If we do a meeting like that, does it become then a public meeting if we travel down there, or if it's information?
So like really today, didn't have to be a public meeting because it's really informational. So as long as it's informational, you're not discussing public business, it would be less of a back and forth probably. But if you're just intaking information, that's not really a public meeting, because there's not a discussion of public business between the four of you guys.
Because I was just looking at the logistics, trying to schedule that meeting, right? If we're
Right.
traveling somewhere, that becomes difficult.
Well, I think it's good that we have a starting point where we can really understand it better and get the information out to the people. And I appreciate this being recorded so that anybody can click on it and understand what's going on. And at this point, we're not making any decisions, we're just pulling everything together to do a pro and con.
Exploratory right now.
Yeah.
Okay. There's no more questions? I appreciate you coming.
My pleasure.
Thank you, Mark.
Nothing more, I'm gonna make a motion, I'm gonna go ahead and end this meeting.
Second,
All those in favor, Mike, Sue,
yes.
Nick,
Yes.
motion passed, adjourned at 8:54.